I watched my boss hand the termination letter to me at 9:47 a.m. on my first day of work. The office was dead silent. Even the coffee machine in the break room seemed to stop gurgling. Sarah Chen, the HR director, wouldn't make eye contact. My hands were shaking as I read the words, "effective immediately," and "regrettable decision." I'd been there for less than 4 hours. What I didn't know in that moment, what nobody in that conference room knew, was that I owned 40.3% of the company they were firing me from. Let me back up, because this whole thing started about 6 months earlier, when everything in my life felt like it was finally clicking into place. My name is Michael Torres. I'm 42, divorced once, and I've spent the last 15 years learning that the American dream doesn't come free. You pay for it with sleepless nights, missed family dinners, and a credit score that swings like a pendulum. But I also learned that sometimes the payoff is real. Sometimes you actually win. I'd been living in a modest 3-bedroom in Portland, Oregon, a suburb called Beaverton, where the HOA fees are reasonable and your neighbors mind their business. The house was small, but it was mine. Fully paid off at 42 years old. That was the first thing I'd learned to be proud of. No mortgage, no debt, just a solid foundation. My ex-wife Jennifer had moved to Seattle with her new fiancé, a real estate developer named Derek. We divorced about 8 years ago, and honestly, it was clean. No kids, no huge fight over assets. We'd both just realized we wanted different things. She wanted excitement and travel. I wanted stability and peace. We were civil about it, which is more than most people can say. I worked for a tech startup called Nexus Solutions, or at least I did before that morning. I'd been there for 3 years as a senior product manager. The job paid well, around $150,000 a year, plus stock options that seemed promising back then. The company had about 40 employees, all of us crammed into a converted warehouse in downtown Portland that smelled like coffee and ambition. The owner was a guy named Brandon Haywood, 44, Stanford MBA, the kind of guy who wore expensive sneakers with his business casual and talked about disrupting the market without irony. He'd founded Nexus with his childhood friend Marcus Webb about 5 years before I joined. The two of them had built something real, a software platform for logistics companies that actually worked. We weren't going to change the world, but we were making money and growing steadily. I was good at my job, really good. I brought in 3 major clients that first year, clients that generated over $2.8 million in annual recurring revenue. My boss Brandon knew it. Everyone knew it. He'd told me multiple times that I was essential to the vision. Those were his exact words. Then, about 6 months before that terrible Monday morning, Brandon called me into his office. It was late, around 6 p.m., and everyone else was heading home. His office was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the warehouse floor where the engineering team worked. He had one of those standing desks that made him look like he was about to go into battle, and he was scrolling through something on his computer. "Michael, close the door," he said. I did. My stomach did a little flip. Even though I'd been doing great, you never want to hear that line. "I've been thinking about the company structure," Brandon continued, still not looking at me. "We're growing, and I need to make some changes to the cap table." The cap table. That's the capitalization table, basically a breakdown of who owns what percentage of the company. I didn't own anything yet. My stock options wouldn't vest until year 4, and I was only at year 3. "Marcus and I have been talking," he went on, "and we want to bring in some outside investment. We're looking at a Series A round, maybe $8 to $10 million. That's going to dilute everyone's equity, obviously, but it's good news for the company." "That sounds great," I said, and I meant it. More funding meant job security. It meant growth. It meant my options might actually be worth something. Brandon finally looked at me. He had this expression like he was about to tell me something important. "We're restructuring the equity grants for new hires, too, making them more competitive. And we're going to offer some of our key people a chance to invest personally in the round." My heart jumped. "Are you asking if I want to invest?" "Maybe," he said. "But first, I want to talk to you about something else. My uncle passed away last month. I haven't told many people. I didn't know Brandon's uncle. I made a sympathetic noise. He left me his house in Malibu, Brandon continued, and now there was something different in his voice, something careful, and about $1.2 million in cash. I've been thinking about what to do with it. I waited. I want to invest it in Nexus, he said, put myself on even better footing with the Series A, but I also want to make sure that the people who've made this company what it is get rewarded. You especially, Michael. You're the reason those 3 clients even looked at us. I felt something warm bloom in my chest. This was validation. This was the dream playing out exactly like you imagined it would when you were working 80-hour weeks for a startup. The boss sees your value. The boss takes care of you. So here's what I'm thinking, Brandon said, leaning back in his chair. I'm going to increase your equity grant. Double it, actually. And I'm going to offer you the chance to buy in at the same valuation the new investors are coming in at. You'd have to put in cash, but if you're interested, it could be significant. Could be life-changing, honestly. I asked him how much cash he was talking about. I was thinking $200,000, he said. That would get you about 18% of the company, assuming the Series A prices us at around $40 million. 18% of a $40 million company. That was something. That was real wealth. That was the kind of thing you told your friends about at a reunion. But $200,000 was also almost all of my liquid savings. I had about $220,000 in my investment accounts, the money I'd saved over 15 years of careful living, side hustles, and saying no to expensive vacations. I need to think about it, I told him. Of course, Brandon said, but don't think too long. I'm making the offer to a couple of other people too, and the window is probably only open for another month or so. I want to close the Series A by end of Q2. I left his office feeling like I was walking on air. That night, I called my best friend David. We'd known each other since college, and he'd actually started his own company 5 years ago, a marketing agency that was doing decently. I needed to talk to someone who understood entrepreneurship. Do it, David said immediately. This is exactly how you build wealth, Michael. You get in on something early, you bet on yourself, you ride it up. But what if it fails? I asked. What if the Series A falls through? What if... Then you lose $200,000, David said. But that's not going to happen. Brandon's got traction. You said the company's growing 30% year over year. That's not a joke. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I ran the numbers with a financial advisor. I looked at comp sales for similar software companies. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. If Nexus was valued at $40 million now, and if they continued to grow like they had been, that valuation could double or triple in 3 to 5 years. 18% of $80 or $120 million would be life-changing. It would be generational wealth. So I did it. I wrote Brandon a check for $200,000 on a Thursday afternoon in November. He was thrilled. He brought me into his office, shook my hand, and told me I'd made the right decision. This is the beginning of something special, he said. I can feel it. For the next 3 months, everything was perfect. The Series A was coming together. Brandon said we had 3 or 4 serious investors interested. The company was humming. We landed 2 new clients. I was working hard, but I felt like I was working toward something, toward my future. Then, in early February, everything changed. Brandon called an all-hands meeting on a Monday morning. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. He told us that the Series A had fallen through. All the investors had pulled out. There'd been some issue with the tech stack, some concerns about scalability, and one of the investors had found out about an old lawsuit against the company, something about intellectual property that I didn't know about. But we're going to pivot, Brandon said, trying to sound confident. We're going to restructure. We're going to make this work. I felt my stomach tighten. I just invested $200,000 of my money in this company, and now the Series A, the entire plan I'd based that investment on, was gone. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called a lawyer. Not a big law firm, just a solo practitioner named David Klein, who had good reviews and happened to have availability. I need to understand my equity agreement, I told him. I just invested in a startup, and I'm worried about what happens if things go sideways. David asked me to send him the documents. I did, And then I waited for the axe to fall, because somehow I knew it would. I could feel it coming, the way you can feel a storm on the horizon. The call from David Klein came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 4 days before I was fired. "Michael," he said, and his voice was careful in a way that made my chest tight. "I need you to come into my office. This is important. There are some things in your agreement that don't look right." I asked him what he meant. "Just come in," he said, "Monday morning, and bring every piece of paper you have related to your investment and your employment contract." That weekend, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that $200,000. I kept thinking about what David Klein's careful voice meant. I kept thinking about Brandon's tired face at the all-hands meeting. Monday morning came gray and cold. I went to my job like normal. I got to the office at 8:30 a.m. and made myself a coffee. At 9:45 a.m., Brandon walked over to my desk and asked me to come into the conference room. Sarah Chen from HR was already there, sitting primly in one of those uncomfortable office chairs. That's when everything fell apart. I sat in that conference room chair, and my vision went narrow, like someone had turned down the color saturation on the world. Brandon wasn't there, just Sarah Chen with her HR folder and her careful expressions. She slid the termination letter across the table like it was contaminated. "We've made the decision to let you go, effective immediately," she said. Her voice had that practiced HR tone, the one they teach you in compliance training. Detached, professional, merciful. "I don't understand," I said. My hands were shaking, actually shaking. "I just landed the Westfield account. That's $600,000 in ARR. "The decision has been made by leadership," Sarah interrupted. She wouldn't look at me. "We're offering 2 weeks of severance and continuation of your health insurance through the end of the month. You'll need to return your laptop and badge immediately." "Can I talk to Brandon?" "Brandon approved this decision," she said. I remember standing up. I remember my chair scraping against the floor. I remember walking past her to the door, and she didn't stop me. Nobody stopped me. The office was quiet. People were pretending to work, but I could feel their eyes on me. The new guy, the guy who got fired on day 1 of his job. Except it wasn't day 1. It was day 1 of a new role. I'd been with the company for 3 years. I drove home in a fog. I didn't even remember getting in my car. The Portland rain was falling, that thin, persistent drizzle that never quite becomes a real storm, and I just sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, staring at my garage door. $200,000. That's what I kept thinking about. $200,000 that I didn't have anymore. Money I'd transferred to Brandon's company in November, based on a handshake and a promise. My phone rang. It was David Klein, my lawyer. "Michael, tell me you didn't go to work today," he said. I did. "And?" "And they fired me." There was a pause. "Come to my office, now. Bring the termination letter." I drove to his office in southeast Portland. It was in a converted Victorian house, the kind that has been carved up into small professional spaces. His office was on the 2nd floor, with a window overlooking Division Street. David was in his mid-50s, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen a lot of bad news. He read my termination letter 3 times, then set it down carefully on his desk. "How much did you invest?" he asked. $200,000. He closed his eyes. Okay. I want you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but it's not. It's actually very real, and it's actually very bad for Brandon Haywood." "What do you mean?" David pulled up something on his computer. It was my equity agreement, the one I'd signed back in November. He started pointing to specific clauses. "Your agreement has what's called a founder's acceleration clause," he said. "It's not standard. In fact, it's usually only found in founder agreements. Basically, it says that in the event of your termination without cause, which firing you on day 1 is definitely without cause, your equity vests immediately, all of it. Not just the percentage you've earned through service, all of it." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," David said slowly, "that you own 18% of Nexus Solutions outright, right now, not at some point in the future, right now." I felt something strange happen in my chest, like a door opening in a room I didn't know existed. But that's not the real problem, David continued. He pulled up another document. The real problem is how your equity was issued. You signed your investment agreement, and then Brandon was supposed to file an amended cap table with the state, a legal cap table, but he didn't. I've been doing some digging. I know a lawyer in Delaware who specializes in this, and there's no record of your equity being properly registered. What does that mean? It means, David said, that technically you own 18% of a company that legally doesn't know you own it. The cap table on file still shows Brandon and Marcus as the only shareholders. And here's the thing. If Brandon is about to raise new capital, if investors are about to come in and buy shares, they're going to do due diligence. They're going to audit the cap table. And when they do, they're going to find out that there's a massive discrepancy. I stood up. I walked to his window and looked out at Division Street. A woman was walking past with an umbrella. A barista was taking a cigarette break outside a coffee shop. The world was continuing like normal, and my world had just split open. "Are you saying I can sue them?" I asked. "No," David said. "I'm saying you have a much bigger problem than a lawsuit. I'm saying you might actually own the company." "That doesn't make sense." "No, it doesn't," David agreed. "But that's the law. Let me make some more calls. I need to talk to a securities attorney. This is getting complicated." I spent that night in my house, in the dark, not turning on any lights. I sat on my couch, and I thought about Brandon's tired face at that all-hands meeting. I thought about the Series A falling through. I thought about the lawsuit he'd never mentioned. I thought about the fact that I'd just been fired by a man who had stolen my money. My phone buzzed at 11 p.m. Text from David. "Call me tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. Don't talk to anyone until then." I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark and I watched the clock move toward morning like it was moving toward Judgment Day. At 7:55 a.m. I called him. "I've talked to 3 lawyers," David said immediately. "Corporate attorney, securities attorney, and a guy who specializes in startup disputes. They all say the same thing. Your equity agreement is real. The failure to register it doesn't invalidate it. It actually makes it stronger in a lot of ways, because it means you have grounds for fraud. And if the company is about to raise capital, which it is, then they have to disclose all shareholders, which means they have to disclose you. So what do? You sit tight," David said, "and you let me send a letter." "What kind of letter?" "The kind that makes people very, very nervous." I waited. "I'm going to send Brandon and Marcus a formal notice," David continued. "I'm going to inform them that you are an equity holder in Nexus Solutions, that you were terminated without cause, and that your equity has vested in full. I'm going to tell them that you're prepared to pursue a fraud claim if they don't immediately reinstate you to your position or provide a buyout at fair market value. And I'm going to tell them that any attempt to raise capital without properly disclosing your equity is securities fraud." "And then what happens?" "Then," David said, "we find out if Brandon Haywood is stupid enough to ignore a lawyer's letter." He sent it that afternoon. I watched David type it up on a video call. Clean language, exact terms, specific dollar amounts. He sent it to Brandon and Marcus at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then my phone rang. It was Brandon. "What the hell did your lawyer send us?" he said. He wasn't even pretending to be calm anymore. His voice was shaking. "I don't know," I lied. "What did he send you?" "Don't play stupid with me, Michael. Did you put him up to this?" "I want my job back," I said, "or I want the money I invested." There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing. "You can't do this," he said finally. "You know that, right? You literally can't do this." "I already did," I said. And then I hung up the phone. That was the moment everything changed. That was when I stopped being the fired employee and started being something else, something dangerous, and Brandon Haywood had no idea what was about to hit him. My phone started ringing again, Brandon calling back, then Marcus, then Sarah Chen from HR. I didn't answer any of them. I just sat in my house, in the dark again, and I waited for the next move, because I knew it was coming. I could feel it the way I'd felt the storm before it hit. And this time, I wasn't running from the rain. I was running toward it. The next morning, I got the call I'd been waiting for. "They want to meet," David said. His voice was different now, sharper, more confident, like a lawyer who just realized his opponent had made a fatal mistake. "Brandon and Marcus, they're requesting a meeting at their office, tomorrow at 10 a.m. "What do I do?" I asked. "You show up," David said, "and you bring me." I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. What if they tried to intimidate me? What if they had their own lawyers? What if this whole thing was some kind of trap? But underneath the fear was something else, something sharp and electric. For the first time since that termination letter, I felt like I had power. The Nexus office looked different when I walked in the next morning, smaller somehow. The warehouse smelled like stale coffee and desperation. People pretended not to watch as David and I were led upstairs to Brandon's office. Brandon was there, Marcus was there, and so was a woman I'd never seen before. Expensive suit, sharp eyes, legal pad in her hands. Their lawyer. "Michael," Brandon said, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for coming." I didn't sit down. David sat. I stood by the window, the same window where Brandon had once told me I'd made the right decision by investing. "Let's not waste time," David said. He pulled out a folder. "My client owns 18% of this company, effective immediately upon his termination without cause. The equity vests fully under the founder's acceleration clause in his agreement. You failed to register this equity with the state, which constitutes fraud. And you terminated him specifically to avoid having to disclose his ownership to incoming investors. That's securities fraud." The lawyer, Brandon's lawyer, leaned forward. "That agreement is not valid. It was never properly—" "It was signed by both parties," David interrupted. "It was witnessed. It was never rescinded. And the failure to register it doesn't invalidate it. If anything, it strengthens Michael's position because it shows intentional concealment." I watched Brandon's face. He looked like a man watching his house burn down. "What do you want?" Marcus asked. His voice was quiet. "Simple," David said. "Either Michael returns to his position as senior product manager at full salary with retroactive pay from the termination date, or you buy out his equity at fair market value. Based on your Series A discussions with investors at a $40 million valuation, 18% is worth $7.2 million. Brandon actually laughed. It was the wrong move. "We don't have $7.2 million. We have about $400,000 in the bank." "Then he comes back to work," David said, "and you immediately disclose his equity to any investors you're talking to. You also provide full transparency on the Series A failure, the lawsuit, and any other liabilities. If you don't, Michael files a fraud claim and a derivative lawsuit on behalf of the shareholders. That lawsuit will make sure nobody invests in this company ever again." The lawyer stood up. "We're done here." "Sit down," I said. Everyone looked at me. I'd been quiet the whole time, and now I was speaking. My voice was steady. "I'm not interested in destroying the company," I continued. "I don't want to sue you. I want one thing. I want my job back. I want to work here. I want to finish what I started, and I want the equity I paid for to be properly registered and disclosed." Brandon stared at me. "Why would you want to come back here, after what we did?" "Because," I said, "I own the place now, and I'm not going to let you burn it down." There was a long silence. "If you come back," Marcus said slowly, "things are going to be different." "I know," I said. "I'll be the guy who owns 18% of the company." They called their other investors that afternoon. 2 of them pulled out immediately. They didn't want to deal with the complexity. But one of them, a venture capitalist named Catherine Wong from San Francisco, saw it differently. "This actually de-risks the investment," she told me when she called. David had given her my number. "You've got a vested stakeholder who's already been screwed once. You're not going anywhere. That's valuable." Catherine came up to Portland the next week. She spent 3 days doing due diligence. She interviewed me. She looked at the books. She talked to our major clients, the ones I'd brought in, and then she made an offer. She would invest $5 million for a 12.5% stake at a $40 million valuation. But there was a condition. The cap table had to be cleaned up. All equity had to be properly registered, and she wanted me to be promoted to Chief Product Officer with a seat on the board. Brandon didn't have a choice. If he said no, the whole company would collapse. The Series A failure had already scared off the other investors. Without Catherine's money, there was no future. So he said yes. The documents were signed in March. My equity was officially registered. I was CPO. I had a seat at the table where decisions got made. And Brandon Haywood had to sit across from me every single day, knowing that I owned a larger piece of his dream than he did. The best part came 3 months later, when we closed a $3.8 million contract with Westfield Industries, the client I'd been working on when they fired me. The contract I'd essentially handed to them on my way out the door. The irony was so perfect that even David laughed about it. "You know what the real justice is?" he asked me over coffee one afternoon. "It's not that you won. It's that you won by being right. You were good at your job. You brought in the revenue. You did everything correctly, and that's what saved you." I thought about that a lot. How different things could have been if I'd been a bad employee, if I hadn't brought in those clients, if I hadn't invested my own money, if I hadn't had the instinct to call a lawyer. But I had done those things. And now, a year after that terrible Monday morning, I was sitting in a board meeting at Nexus Solutions, watching the company I'd helped build finally grow the way it was supposed to. Brandon didn't last much longer. He sold his remaining shares to Catherine Wong 8 months after she came in. He took a consulting fee and disappeared to Malibu to play with his inheritance. Marcus stayed, but everything changed between us. He couldn't look at me the same way. And me? I stayed. I built that company. I grew the revenue to $18 million in ARR. I hired better people. I fixed the problems that had made the Series A fall through in the first place. I also made sure that every employee contract was crystal clear. No ambiguity, no handshakes, everything in writing. Because the one thing I learned from all of this is that nice guys don't finish last. But guys who don't protect themselves, they get fired on their first day. And sometimes, if they're lucky, they own the company that fires them.